All right, guys, this is objective 2 of the lecture series on matter cycle and energy flow for organisms. Um, this one's going to focus on photosynthesis, the equation for photosynthesis, what it is, and how plants actually make their own food and support the ecosystem of the planet. By the way, I'll start with a hint here. It's not really plants that do this, but the mystery will be solved at the end. Okay, so photosynthesis. In photosynthesis, this is the basic setup here. Carbon dioxide is absorbed from the air, and water is absorbed through the roots of the organism, or if it's an algae that's doing this, directly from the water. And then, with the power of sunlight that's absorbed by specialized structures inside of these organisms, they convert that carbon dioxide to sugar and water into oxygen. And this is essentially the I would say, chemical equation of life. A lot of life forms are possible in this planet due to the fact that photosynthesis is a thing. So you need carbon dioxide and water to make sugar and oxygen. And a lot of questions in the test is going to basically ask you to know this by heart. So you need to know what is required and what comes out of it. So you will also note later on, we're going to talk about this. It's exactly the opposite of cellular respiration, but that's pretty much it. Now, plants make oxygen from water. It's a big misconception that people have that the water, the carbon dioxide becomes oxygen. But actually, it's the water that roots absorb that actually makes the oxygen, or where the oxygen comes from. During the process of photosynthesis, water is actually broken apart to actually create oxygen in one of the steps. And you learn more about the detail of that chemistry when you get to higher level courses. But for now, you need to know that the oxygen does not come from the carbon dioxide that plants trap. In fact, the carbon dioxide that's trapped by plants forms sugar. Now, that means that the plants, the cells, since most of the plant's material is made of cellulose, which is the sugar that you can find inside of the barks of trees, for example, all of that is made from pure air out of the carbon dioxide trapped during photosynthesis. This technically means that most other stuff that plants are made of is thin air. So that's huge trees, air is what builds them. The mass that makes the trees comes from the air. And that kind of makes sense, because if the plants took their mass from the soil, as they grow, the soil underneath them would slowly implode and disappear. And that's not what you see. And there's actually experiments that have been done a long time ago to show that the soil barely changes in mass. And in fact, it's the water you're putting into the soil that ends up being picked up and becoming oxygen that goes back to the air. So most of the stuff that the plant is built of actually comes from the air it captures. Now, the energy to power this whole process comes from sunlight, and it's captured by pigments inside of the leaves, inside the chloroplasts. They have tiny specialized pigments that capture sunlight. One of the most important ones of those pigments is called chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is the main pigment that does photosynthesis, and because it does not trap the green color, that is why the plants look green, because they reflect the green. As the light passes through the plants, it absorbs almost all of the other colors except for green. By the way, chlorophyll specializes in absorbing the blue/violet part of the spectrum, and a different kind of chlorophyll absorbs kind of like the reddish-orange part of the spectrum, leaving the kind of green in the middle as the part that's not absorbed by the chlorophyll pigments. There are additional pigments, but chlorophyll is the most important one that you need to know. Now, this process, by the way, is only possible because of that endosymbiont we talked about in the previous video called the chloroplast. It's actually a tiny little living bacteria of sorts that lives inside every single plant cell and algae cell in the planet. And that's what actually does the photosynthesis in the planet. So that's what I said at the beginning of the video, that plants weren't really the ones doing the photosynthesis. It's really the bacteria living inside of them that's doing it. Now, of course, that chloroplast can only be there because the plant cell is there providing its safety. So yes, plants do a lot of photosynthesis, and so do algae. But since most of the planet is covered with water, there's way more algae doing photosynthesis than there are plants doing it. But even then, that's not the primary photosynthetic life in the planet. So we're going to get to that in a second over here. So let's talk about what photosynthesis did for the history of our planet and how it helped us, right? So what does it do for the world? First of all, it has a unique role in ecosystems, right? Because plants are the basis of all food webs, it's essentially what powers up all of the food chains and food webs of the ecosystems. Plants always make extra food. They make extra food for times where they are not going to have sunlight, times where it's winter time and the sun is not out for as long, or nighttime where they don't have the ability to do photosynthesis. So they always store extra. That's the way plants work. They store for the future. So because of that, they always have extra food inside of them. And then by eating that is what powers the entire food web. If plants didn't build extra food, we wouldn't be able to have all of the ecosystems of the earth wouldn't be possible. If they only made enough food to supply for themselves, because they store for the future, that's how we can support all the food webs of the planet. And then for the history of life, plants made it possible for life to go beyond hydrothermal vents, like the ones you see in the picture here in the bottom left. That's the only places that life would have been able to survive in without photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is what allowed life to leave the depths of the ocean near the volcanic vents, where the chemistry of breaking down other kinds of compounds was the status quo, and then be able to power and make food out of the carbon dioxide that's in the air and out of the using the energy of the sunlight, not the heat energy and the chemical energy of the volcanic fumes. So from there, we have water life all over the ocean, and you can see here how these algae blooms of diatoms, a specific type of algae, very common near coastlines or areas of the ocean that get sudden influxes of nutrients. You got this huge bloom of algae, and the forests of the world. All of that life is not only possible due to the fact that we have photosynthesis. Now, photosynthesis also has an important effect for the ecosystems of the planet in the sense of what it does to the oxygen and carbon cycle. So photosynthesis traps oxygen from the air. No, traps carbon dioxide from the air and releases oxygen. So that's where all the oxygen that's in the planet comes from. 21% of our atmosphere is made of oxygen. And for a while, that was not the case. Until photosynthetic forms evolved, gases like carbon dioxide and other types of volcanic gases were way more common in the air. So the reason our atmosphere is full of oxygen is thanks to photosynthetic life forms. And in fact, we now even have something called an ozone layer, right, that protects us from ultraviolet radiation, allowing life on land to be possible. And that wouldn't even be around if it wasn't for all the oxygen produced by life. But there's something else that they do. They also trap carbon dioxide, which is a greenhouse gas. So because they trap carbon dioxide, they also have an effect on the climate. By trapping carbon dioxide, they lower the amount of greenhouse gases which are in the air. So all the algae, all the cyanobacteria, all the plants doing photosynthesis on the world cause less carbon dioxide to be trapped, be in the atmosphere, and more of it to be trapped in life. And that means the greenhouse effect is reached slightly better than it would have been otherwise, thanks to the effect of plants. So every time you cut down a tree, you're not only making it releasing that carbon dioxide if you burn it or you use it for something else, you are also taking away the ability of the tree to trap the carbon dioxide that it would if it was alive. So that's why deforestation does damage twice to the climate of the planet in that sense. And there are other reasons too, because forests also are important for the way that the water vapor distribution happens in the planet and do climate that way as well. So there's even more of that, which is a whole different story. So plants are definitely, photosynthesis is definitely very, very, very important for the world. But which are the organisms that do photosynthesis? Yes, you can think of plants. They're probably the major one you can think about. But there's way more algae in the ocean doing photosynthesis than there are plants, right? There's seaweed, yes, but there's algae, microscopic life forms in the water, cousins of the chloroplasts, also which are called cyanobacteria. All of that in the water. So most of the life forms that do photosynthesis are actually in the water. The most common type of photosynthetic life form in the water you will find are called diatoms, which are tiny microscopic little algae, which bloom every time nutrients are available. So they're going to be common near rivers and near coastal lines and in areas of the ocean that get sudden influxes of nutrients. And you get that beautiful green water that blooms as these algae become more available. And then animals that live off of that can actually grow as well and be supported by this amount of algae growth. But perhaps throughout the history of the Earth, the number one photosynthetic life form is actually cyanobacteria. They are the tiny little bacteria that live all over the planet, in the land, in the water, inside of every plant technically, inside of every algae technically, because chloroplasts are descendants of cyanobacteria. Essentially, it's cyanobacteria that does the job. They're the number one photosynthetic life forms in the planet, especially if you consider that all the chloroplasts are really kind of specialized cyanobacteria living inside of plants and algae cells. So that is our bit about photosynthesis. On the next video, we're going to focus on cellular respiration. I hope you learned a lot, and I'll see you then.